All right. So, welcome everybody to our tips and tricks coffee break. For today, we've got Mike Taylor with us, who's going to be showing you how to manage your passwords and security management. I just want to remind you, you've got the Q&A um, logo at the bottom or the chat box if you have any questions. So, thanks, Mike, for being with us.
Thanks, Tracy. Hello, everybody. Today we're covering just a quick webinar on password and security management, as Tracy said. So the agenda will cover just like an overview. I call it the rings of security. Talk about users and then kind of the security within SAP Business One, license levels and authorizations and how to reset passwords, etc. So the rings of security, we wanted to do a little bit more than just what's in SAP. I'm not going to show you how to do the Windows security or SQL today, but just so you're kind of aware of the rings of security, how it affects your system, and how it can end up affecting your SAP system and how it functions. So you think of the Windows user is the outermost level of protection. If people can't get access to your servers or to your physical PCs, then that's kind of the first level of, say, defense security. Of course, you have a password. You would want to follow. I'm not going to cover best practices for passwords and all that stuff. Everybody knows, change your password, all that. Do you want to do that? IT wants you to do that. You should have some sort of minimum policy on passwords. I won't cover too much more than saying that. You have your Exchange and your Outlook. A lot of the times that's similar or the same password. Again, with your physical PC is secure or your server. If your password is compromised, you have multi-factor authentication too. So you probably run into this a little bit, but you can have your Exchange. Your Exchange can have multi-factor authentication. I think my computer is now asking me for a PIN code. We use modern authentication to connect to Office 365 and to the Exchange. And you have the option with SAP to use single sign-on, which is really interesting. I don't think a lot of people use it, but you can actually link your Windows user to your SAP user so that if your Windows user logs in, they can log in directly to SAP and not even have to enter a password. So does that it is easier for the user, but then of course it puts more burden on the Windows user to keep that controlled, because if people get access to the PC, they'll immediately have access to SAP. So it is very convenient, single sign-on. We could do that for you, SSO. The next level is your database user. So if somebody does get access to your server, you don't, of course, do they know what they're looking for, where they're going? If they do, or they at least harvest your database, they will be able to get into your SQL if they can take a backup or find the backup files. The database user is kind of the second level of defense, the perimeter. You have your SA, and your SA would be the typical SQL user, and then your system user would be your HANA, kind of these are like the primary root passwords. So you want to kind of control your SA. SA is a system administrator in SQL land, and then the system passwords. So if you have users doing Crystal reports or DTW, data transfer workbench stuff, you can just make them a different user that only has access to certain databases, and you can connect them that way. So especially with Crystal reports or like the database, if you do give someone access to the database directly or to Crystal reports directly, they're going to have access to basically everything. There's no way to restrict somebody with Crystal reports effectively from looking at every table, especially if they know what they're looking for. They can just write queries around what you're trying to control or protect. So if you're, if you're trying to control item cost, you don't want your employees to know your costing or certain things. I've seen some pretty extreme examples of that. A lot of people are more transparent about it, but just be aware that if they have the database access, if they have database access, they basically have access to everything data-wise. And again, Crystal reports DTW. DTW with the newer versions does not require a database user. You just use your SAP user, which is good, but the older ones do use a direct SQL connection as well. So you can make a specific read-only Crystal reports user, and then you're not giving them your main like SA user. So with the database user too, you can lock the accounts, non-SA lock. You don't want to lock that primary SA or system user because it can be how we actually connect to the databases. So this SLD is a system landscape directory. If you end up changing the SA password and you don't let us know, it can cause a lot of different issues. So if you change the SA password and you say, oh, we have a password policy, we just change it periodically, but you don't update that in SAP, you will effectively sever the connection from SAP to the databases. And as a warning as well with Windows users, specifically with Exchange, if you're using something like B1 Up Print and Delivery, if you do change the user's password that you're using, say on a central account, if you change like accounts receivable at yourcompany.com, it can impact whether you can send out emails, and we might not notice, or you might not notice for a couple days. So it's better to have some way to be aware of those things, or have an IT person that is like a little bit used to what SAP's requirements are, and then just let us know. If you need to reset the SA password, we get a lot of IT people that will just change it, and just be aware that doing that can have downstream impacts to your SAP system, specifically for SA or whatever you use to connect to the database and Exchange.
Mike, I have a
Yep,
question.
yeah,
I just want to know, are you going to be showing us how to do these in SAP?
eventually.
Oh,
Trying to rush,
okay.
are
I was wondering.
are you
I'm
trying to
sorry.
rush me?
No,
Trying
no,
to
not at
rush
all.
me?
I was just wondering if you'd
This is,
forgotten to switch the screen, and I was saying I still see that. Okay, no problem. I'm sorry
yeah,
about
no,
that.
it's a good question.
Okay,
I kind of said, I know,
I'm
it's
letting
just
you
me
go.
talking,
That's
just
okay.
me
That's all
talking.
right. Thanks.
I don't really want to, I'm not really an expert at Windows user and modifying the passwords and stuff. So I could show the database user, I just want people to be kind of aware of the levels more at a high level. But anyway, thanks for the
Okay, that's
feedback.
good.
And then so the last level is SAP user, and I will be showing the SAP user stuff because that's what I actually know how to do. I mean, to be clear, I do know how to change the database user and all that stuff. It's just not necessarily something that a regular SAP user would be doing. But just so you're aware, with the SAP users is kind of your last line of defense. I don't From my standpoint, I don't need your SAP user to get access. I don't need your SAP user to harvest your data. I don't need your SAP user to look at your accounts and your stuff. But from a standpoint of somebody just snooping around or getting access to seeing your data that you don't want, sales numbers, financial numbers, etc., you have your SAP user. So you have your passwords. Again, you could do single sign-on, and that'll kind of combine your Windows user and your SAP user. I will talk about resetting them. We'll talk about locking users, and we'll talk about license levels and authorizations. Okay, so let's jump into SAP. That was a fair question, though, Tracy, because I have definitely left my screen and kept talking. So for your login, for users, again, this is kind of the thing within SAP that we control. Modules, administration, setup, general, and users. This is the main form for users within SAP. So again, the Windows user is different than the Exchange user, is different than the SAP user. This is your last kind of line of security with your SAP data. I'll find myself. And you see with the user form, you have a lot of options. So the bind with Microsoft Windows account, this is where you can actually link together your Windows users and your SAP users in order to have access to them. So this requires a little bit of setup, but you can actually give people access to specific databases. And again, when they log in, they'll just use SSO. and they can log in. If they primarily only work with what they like with their one PC, it's very convenient. If you have one terminal or one PC, it's easier. I mean, you can always override it too. We do the groups here. So we have user groups. So when we talk more about authorizations, you can put users into authorization groups. So you can just have, sales users, order desk, warehouse users with a nicely controlled level of authorization and put the user there. Then you have your passwords. So the password, click it. In this case, I am actually logged in as the manager user, so it prompts me for the old password, but you can reset a user's password. If you take nothing away from this other than this, you can just go to the user form, find the user who has forgotten their password, go to the password, click the ellipses little 3-dot button there, reset the password. You could just set it to 154, 154. In this case, I have a low password policy, and then just check change password at next login. So if you're giving somebody their login, you could say, oh, I just reset your password to 154. When you log in the next time, you will be prompted to enter a stronger password, and then they will do that. In relation to the password policy, a little bit deeper in the menu structure, you have administration, setup, general, security, and then password administration. So this is a demo system and my security level is low, but you can go medium, high, or custom, and you see all these elements here. So it can automatically expire. -1 just means it never expires. You have all sorts of other aspects, how many uppercase, lowercase digits, and different things. You can prevent them from using previous passwords. And then you can say if they try more than 3 times, then it'll lock the system. And you could see examples of the password. So if I set it to high, you could see examples here. And you can actually use these as the password if you want to set this for the user. Or it's just helpful for when the user is making the new password that they know that they have to have one of capital, lowercase, a character, etc. To do custom, you can kind of match whatever your corporate policy is for that. But this will impact what you can do as your passwords and is a best practice to make sure people don't get access to the different levels of system. So if people have figured out that your manager user, which is a super user, has a password of 124, I'm definitely guilty of this. They can just bypass everything, go into the settings, and they can see whatever they need to see or change anything they need to change. So keeping security in mind, it's important to set a reasonable policy. Certain things you need the password to never expire, so you can kind of override certain things. This would really only be used, in my opinion, for indirect users. So if you use an indirect user for, say, connecting to your B1UP server component, and you're not going to change that, and it's using an indirect license anyways, it doesn't really matter if the password expires. I mean, if somebody gets in, they won't be able to use the user interface anyways, so it's not too much of a concern. But yeah, so the password never expires. You can use that as you need to. And then if a user is, say, you retire them and maybe they leave the organization, you can lock them. Best practice to lock and make sure that you go to the licenses and remove them or remove their licenses. So
Mike, I have a question here. Just a
yeah.
sec. Marielle, if you want to increase the security level, will it prompt users with inadequate password to update their password?
I don't believe so, but if you do set your user policy to, say you do say reset it every 30 days, what am I doing here? You could just set it to reset, and I believe then it will prompt it. So if you say expires after, in theory, you could say maybe expires after 1 day, make everybody reset it, and then after the 1 day, when everybody freaks out and can't get access to SAP, then you can set it up to 30 days. Or you can manually reset your users to 124 and then just, with your new security level. But I don't believe there's a mechanism that will give them a prompt all at once that I know of anyways. But Yeah.
Marielle, if that doesn't answer your question, do you want to just speak with Mike? I could just, here, just a second. I'll just allow you to talk here if you want to ask him the question yourself. Okay, she says she's good. Okay, thanks, Marielle.
Okay. Yeah. So once you have it set up, then if it expires every 30, once you set your new path, technically you could just, you're already running on low. You could set it to what you're going to set it to custom, and then it will automatically expire. And technically you could kind of forget about it. It's not, you know, another 30, another 20 days or whatever. It's not necessarily the worst thing in the world. I say that as not being an IT type infrastructure person, but best practice is to not have like 1234 as your password. Okay, so users, again, if a user leaves organization, I really recommend you could just make a new user, take the licenses and authorizations off the old user and move them to the new one. I see so often somebody who's logging in with somebody who's not even their own name. So, I'm Mike, I go log in with like Steve's login. I mean, it really does that welcome them to the organization. It doesn't cost more money to move them over. It's very simple for us to do if you don't know how to do it. You can even copy the form settings over. You can copy every setting over to the new user, and then you have a better, a more secure trail of who did what. So then you don't look back and you see, I was doing a bunch of stuff, and then it shows as Steve. You can look back in the change logs and see the correct user. So that's a little bit of a side rant there. Is easy to make new users. Okay, so the next layer of security is the licensing. So the licenses are, I only have a pro user, this being just a demo, but you can have limited, logistics, financial, CRM, and I have the comparison chart. So the pro actually can do everything. The limited ones are half the price, but they are limited in functionality. So you can get this chart for matrix comparison, and you could filter it and see the different sections. And some of them don't have super duper logical. You can't necessarily say, oh, this new employee does invoices, purchasing, banking, but also does delivery. The smaller the organization, where people wear more hats, the more difficult it is to get the limited. Again, the small organizations, because so many people do so many different things, the pro license is where you're going to need to do. But the security aspect of this is it will limit you, say, a limited CRM person, from going through all of the invoices, and it'll set kind of the outer permissions for what they're allowed to do and what forms they're allowed to access. So you can go through here, assign these licenses. And again, if you lock the user, just come in, strip all these licenses out, boom. Even if the person does have infrastructure access or terminal, or you didn't control that, then at least they won't be able to get into SAP. If they're trying to get back at you and steal your customer list and all that stuff, you can control that and prevent them from getting in and doing that. Of course, if they do have the SA login and they do know how to get access to SQL Management Studio, you have to watch out for that. But again, this is a lower level of permission. The next thing we have in the security is, and probably your last line of kind of defense is in security land, is your authorizations. So if we have manager, let's look at one that's not a super user. So non-super users, you can have your various levels of authorizations, and you can control these. You could do them at the group level as well. I didn't talk about this too much, but these groups here, you can assign a user to multiple groups. You can define more groups, and then you can set them for their authorization levels. So you would go to administration setup, general user groups, and then you can make a new one and make it an authorization group, and you can get really specific. It's nice if you have maybe a larger organization and you have more specific roles. The licenses set up with these limited formats like this are really good for more of the medium-sized business, where the roles are divided into more specific functions. So if you have an order desk person that doesn't also do deliveries and invoices and purchasing, then it makes more sense to utilize more limited roles. And then you can also set them into nice authorization levels. So you can make onboarding a lot easier. You don't have to manage it by user. You can just pop them into the group and put the limited CRM on them, and then they'll be easy to get ready to roll.
Yeah, Mike, and I just want to say something too. If anybody needs that license comparison chart, I have it. And I also find it practical when someone needs a new license to see what tasks they're going to be doing and what. So if anybody needs this chart here, just send me an email.
Yeah, yeah. Again, it is a little frustrating for smaller organizations because they want to save money, but then they realize, oh, this limited logistics is great, but then they're like, oh, they also need to be able to do quotes anyway. So again, it's more so divided up for mediumer organizations. Okay, so you have your authorizations, all these different levels. I have this guide here, how to, and this guide really explains what each one of these specific things does. What you don't want to do is come in here and say no authorization, and then come in and start to say, oh, okay, give them full access to the sales order. This will not work because there are so many other things that are not going to be able, like you won't be able to PDF it, you won't be able to print it, you won't be able to do all these things. So I recommend to start with more permissions. Say you start with full authorizations and then start to whittle away down to no authorizations on the specific things that you don't want them to do, rather than starting by restricting authorizations fully, because you're going to run into a lot of things in the customizations and the administration stuff that you're going to need, and it's going to make life pretty miserable for that user if they can't do any of these different things, when in reality you just want to control specific forms perhaps, or reports. Okay, so, and we can give you this PDF as well. So some of these are definitely confusing, and I use this all the time, and it gives you very specific information on the very specific pieces in the different areas. So it is incredibly handy.
You can send that to me, Mike, too, that document. So if anybody wants it, I'll have it.
Yep.
Thanks.
We'll do that. Yep. So I think that's here. So again, I haven't shown the Windows users and database users too much, but just be aware that changing infrastructure passwords will have an effect on us. And especially with Exchange, I know sometimes there's emergency stuff where you have to, somebody's email is compromised and you need to change it immediately. Just know that if you have something like B1 print and delivery, you need to double check, especially if it's one of the central accounts. With the database users as well, if you have something like the SA user and you just go to change it because you don't remember it, this has happened before, it can cause your SAP system to go down. So that's kind of a big thing we wanted to get through with this webinar. Any other questions relating to the rings of security or anything else that I covered?
Yeah, you can use the chat box if anybody has any questions. All right, I think all is good. Mike, thank you so
Okay,
much. And
awesome.
Marielle, send me an email so I could send you that chart that you want, Tracy@forgestik.com. And I'm there to help with anything at all that's not technical. So feel free to reach out anytime you want. So thank you very much, Mike, and have a good weekend, everybody.
Thank you very much. Bye.